So the seaside holidays have also been a popular leisure activity throughout the long 19th century, and increasingly so with the popularization of the railways. If you know anything about the history of the 19th century, the railways started to change the outlook of the British countryside, and by the 1840s, it was basically easy and relatively cheap to get anywhere, and especially to go to the seaside. So what earlier in at the turn of the 19th century and in the Regency period was a kind of very aristocratic and expensive activity that was available only to the richest sections of the society. You may remember Prince Regent's summer palace in Brighton. By the middle of the 19th century became very democratic. So seaside holidays became a Victorian institution for the middle class, also increasingly even for the working class. Perhaps not the most fashionable resorts in the south of England, but places like Blackpool on the western coast, relatively near the industrial centres of Birmingham and Liverpool and Manchester, that were increasingly gaining popularity also among the working classes. So we have the great fashion for the seaside holidays. And of course, as with everything that was fashionable, there is a growing specialization of clothes and special costumes designed and popularized by the growing fashion for seaside holidays. We have already discussed that the sailor costume that became so popular with children. As you will see in a moment, there are some reminiscences of the sailor suit also in some aspects of female fashions, but there are other things to consider. So of course holiday clothes were a bit more comfortable and loose and less tightly fitted than your regular city clothes, although when the fashion dictated it, they should be worn with the corset just as well. Perhaps not as tightly laced, but still. But there is one more thing to consider. The holiday fashions were designed to be worn mostly outdoors, because the most important thing to do during the seaside holidays was to walk in the open air. It wasn't really about the sea as such, although sea bathing also was quite popular for health reasons, but the most fashionable activity was walking. That is why so many seaside resorts have piers or promenades, either along the waterfront or actually extending into the sea, so that you would walk surrounded by the beneficial sea air. That meant you were more in danger of becoming suntanned. And nobody in the 19th century wanted to have suntanned skin. Pale skin was seen as more attractive, more ladylike, and if you had suntan on your face, on your neck, on your hands, this was unladylike. This signified you were working in the field. You were basically a peasant woman, and nobody wanted that. You may recall this cartoon ridiculing the ladies who were too careless and they got their hands suntanned during a game of tennis. So holiday clothes are designed to cover as much of skin as possible. So they would have extra long sleeves, or they would be worn with extra long gloves. They would have very high necklines. And basically they would cover as much skin as possible. As for the face, there were different ways of doing that. Of course, carrying a parasol was a very fashionable thing to do. So you would carry like a little umbrella, but to protect you not from the rain, but from the direct sunlight. You would kind of shade yourself by the parasol, or you might want to wear special hats or special bonnets. And there were special designs, especially around the middle of the 19th century, being advertised as holiday hats, holiday wear. One type was a hat with a very broad brim, and here we have a cartoon from Punch in which a lady, or actually more women, are wearing such broad-brimmed hats during some sort of picnic. And you can see a gentleman friend also benefiting from the shade and hiding from sunlight under the brim of his companion's hat. Another type, which was quite popular around the middle of the 19th century, was a type of bonnet called the ugly. The uglies were bonnets with kind of collapsible brims. So the crown stayed in place, it just kind of didn't move, but the brim was a kind of collapsible shade that you could pull over your face, or half of your face, to create additional protection from sunlight. And here we have another cartoon showing a scene at the seaside, probably, with two ladies seated, engaged in reading. This was quite a popular thing to do at the seaside. And gentlemen who are passing them, and they are quite perplexed because they do not know whether they know the ladies or not, so should they greet them or not, because they are wearing the uglies. Possibly the term comes from the fact that it kind of covered the face of the lady, so you couldn't see whether she was pretty or not. But this was quite a popular type of holiday wear, so completely different attitudes towards what is the best type of clothes to wear at the seaside. So what we have later on, we have quite a lot of paintings showing the scenes at the seaside, and you always see that these people are fully dressed and even more covered than they would be in the city. So the idea was to walk, to inhale the air, but to cover yourself as much as possible. You could wear whatever was fashionable, so we have the crinoline dresses, fashionable crinoline dresses being worn at the seaside, actually on the beach. We have the bustle dresses being worn at the seaside. So the point was to walk, to have picnics, to basically kind of sit down, relax, and enjoy the view, rather than the most popular things to do today, that is to suntan and to swim in the sea. However, if we think of sea bathing, this has been quite popular ever since the 18th century. In the 18th century, there was a big fashion for the spas, for the healing waters of places like Bath, for example. They kind of reactivated the old Roman bath in the city of Bath, and everybody who was anybody, like Jane Austen, would go there and partake of the water. So the seaside basically followed this trend, and many doctors believed that immersing yourself in cold water was also very beneficial for your health. But of course, you needed special clothes. These were not the clothes that many people would actually see, because you would basically wear them inside the water. So while you were sea bathing, I'm not saying swimming because swimming was not very popular among women, because it was basically very difficult to learn how to swim wearing those clothes. Some parents, some people kind of learned still. For example, Queen Victoria knew how to swim, but she was the queen. And if we look at the culture of sea bathing, and of course the clothes connected with sea bathing, here we have an early example from 1810. So you see a tunic, which is not very long, because it would be very uncomfortable to actually wear while it was wet. But because it is short, it is worn with those long pantalettes. So we have the tunic with the long pantalettes, with some sort of cap or bonnet, so the hair would be pulled up and covered by some sort of headwear. Here the lady is also carrying a shawl, probably to wrap around herself afterwards. So the point was that you would immerse yourself in the water, splash around for a couple of minutes, go back, change into your day clothes. There was also a special way to do it, so the invention of the so-called bathing machine. It was an invention of the early 19th century that became very popular around the middle of the century, and basically was fashionable until the 70s, 60s, late 60s or 70s in most places, where it was replaced by a regular changing boot somewhere at the top of the beach. The idea was that it was a changing boot on wheels driven by a horse. So this was only used by women. Men didn't care so much. Actually, men, if they wanted to swim, most often than not, they would swim in the nude, but not at public beaches. When public beaches became popular, they started wearing some sort of swimming trunks, usually with a top as well. But this is really the late 19th century invention. So a woman who wanted to partake of sea bathing would hire the bathing machine. Local people basically operated them for a fee. This was additional source of income for them. So she would rent a bathing machine alone, or usually with some small company of other women. They would get into the bathing machine and change from the day clothes into the bathing costume, while the machine was being slowly lowered into the water, so that the women could descend by a few steps straight into the water without the danger of being seen by anyone who just happened to be walking next to the beach. So you can see quite a lot of images of the bathing machines and the bathers using them. So you can see they are like really changing boots on wheels. They are lowered into the water. Sometimes there were, let's say, helpers or professional people who helped the women, because many women were actually afraid of the water, even if it wasn't very deep. So they would hold her hands while she was being dipped into the water a few times, and then she would climb up, and while the machine was being pulled out from the water, she would change into her day clothes, perhaps then sit on the beach for a while to dry her hair or something. Actually, this was something very attractive for young men, and we have a lot of recollections of Victorian men who wanted to take early morning walks, because the sea bathing was basically a morning activity, so you would have a long day in front of you, and try to catch a glimpse of bathing women or women drying their hair at the beach. So they would wear their hair loose. you wouldn't really see a grown-up woman with her hair loose outside of her bedroom. So this was something attractive, this was something titillating. We have quite a lot of images of the machines themselves, different types of the machines. Sometimes they would have those collapsible shades, a little bit like those ugly bonnets. So to provide extra security, that nobody would see the lady getting into the water and back into the machine. So they would have those collapsible things. We have an image and then a photograph of such a machine. And another photograph, I think this was actually taken by me, at Osborne House, so the summer palace of Queen Victoria, and it shows Queen Victoria's own bathing machine. They had a little beach at Osborne House, and of course when the Queen wanted to enjoy the sea, she would definitely use the bathing machine. It even had like special rails, so it would just operate for one person at one place. So as you can see, it's like a changing boot with the steps, so that Queen and her companions could step straight into the water. This was something that was extremely popular in all seaside resorts. So if we have images or photographs of seaside resorts at the middle of the 19th century, you almost always see the bathing machines. Later on, from the 60s onwards, they are gradually replaced by regular changing booths. So little structures, usually wooden structures, that would not be movable. So you would just rent them and use them for changing. This is the moment when pelerines become very fashionable, so that the ladies could cover themselves with a large pelerine for the moment when they were going out of the changing booth into the water, and then gather the pelerine back when they were going back. The turn of the century, or kind of later 19th century images sometimes show the booths at the top of the beach, or on the piers, so you can actually descend straight into the water by some steps. And you also see quite a lot of those pelerines, or kind of mantles, to use by the women. There are quite a few fashion plates that include bathing costumes, and we have some examples here as well. So not much changes. There is a tunic, there are some pants, and there is some headwear. Usually they would be worn with some slippers, so some sort of feet protection as well. The idea was to cover as much of the body as possible, to protect the hair from getting wet, if you could, because normally, well, it would get damp, but not thoroughly drenched, because then you'd have to wait longer for it to dry. The length of the tunic is usually quite short, no longer than knee length, because of course if you went into the water it would go up anyway, so that's the point of wearing those pants, to protect your legs. So as you can see, it doesn't look like anything that could be seen by strangers, by onlookers and passers-by. Now, of course, compared with modern swimming costumes, it's bulky and it has too many layers, and of course it was made of some sort of let's say regular fabric. They didn't have those special fabrics with elastic that are now used for bathing costumes. So these are like regular clothes serving a special purpose. So they generally follow the fashion, but here the purpose is really taking precedence. We have some more plates from the 70s when the social rules, the modesty rules are a little bit relaxed. So these clothes might have shorter sleeves, and they would be generally shorter, and they would be worn with those pelerines while on the beach, and then they would be a bit more comfortable actually in the sea. And this is when they start having those maritime decorations, especially the kinds of collars, and especially kind of decorative ribbons or decorative bands that resemble the sailor costumes. So if you look at the fashion plates of sea bathers from the 70s and later, very often they have those sailor collars or those decorative ribbons or bands that basically are associated with the Navy, with the sea, with the seaside holidays as well. Quite often the women on the fashion plates are accompanied by children, so you can look at the bathing costumes for children as well. They follow the same principles, some sort of a tunic with the pants. Perhaps for the children, keeping the hair up was not that important because then it would dry naturally. But the idea is basically the same, and it continues in the 80s. It continues in the Belle Epoque as well. So what we have are those sailor suit inspired garments that are very, very characteristic for the turn of the century, for the Edwardian period. Then it becomes more acceptable to be actually seen wearing those costumes on the beach. We have some photographs of families and women sea bathing, so having a photograph becomes a very popular souvenir from the seaside holidays, and nobody gets too fussy about being seen. So what we arrive at in the early years of the 20th century, so in the Edwardian period, are those classical Belle Epoque bathing costumes with sailor suit elements, especially in the decorations and the collars. The pants are shorter, there might be knee length, so you might actually see some naked ankle or part of a leg of a woman. They are worn usually with some caps or other hair protection, and still nobody wants to get suntanned, and these costumes are acceptable only for the duration of the sea bathing session. So later on they would be changed into more appropriate day clothes. So that's basically it, and next time we'll talk about the clothes for special occasions.